we're talking about classification of organisms, or basically we are looking at some systematic way of arranging all the organisms or the information that we know of. So there is a scientific field which talks about how we can classify them into different groups, how we can give them names, and so on. Anyone can give? Can you think of that the right name for this classification of organisms? Yes, anyone?
Taxonomy.
Yeah. So the the scientific field which deals with classification, which deals with the naming of these organisms and classifying these based on their characteristics, is all called as taxonomy. Okay. Now, if you observe, we had earlier discussed about how elements are classified, how these elements are put together into a table, which we now call as the modern periodic table. And there we are only dealing with about 118 elements. So there isn't much diversity that way in chemistry. However, if you are classifying the life around us, the plants and animals around us, you will realize that there are millions and millions of varieties there. So then classifying them can't just be very superficial like we do in the case of elements. It can't be where you call them as just as metals, non-metals, or divide them into vertical columns and say that they are all groups which have the same pattern and so on. So because there is much more diversity, organisms which have to be classified, basically plants and animals are around us, when they are classified across multiple levels. Okay, so we refer to them as ranks basically. And in the modern classification, there are multiple ranks that we use. So the first one is domain, which is a relatively new rank. Under the domain, you have the kingdom. Kingdom was the name kingdom, or plants being classified in kingdom has been on for some time. Okay, and under kingdom you have phylum, and sometimes this phylum is also referred to as a division. Okay, so in case you come across this name division, you should not be confused. It essentially means that it is phylum only. Then you have a class. Then you have order. You have family. And finally, you have genus and then species. Okay, so if you count how many levels we classify, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 levels. The species, till the species. Now remember that this domain is something which is not something which is commonly referred to. In your textbook also, there is a high possibility that they would have started at kingdom. They might not have started at the domain level. Okay. Now the current taxonomy system, Carl Linnaeus is considered the father of the modern taxonomy system. Carl Linnaeus. Okay. Now all the taxonomy or the way of classifying or the way of naming species or plants and animals is was what was proposed by Carl Linnaeus, and it is called as a Linnaean taxonomy. Linnaean taxonomy. So Linnaean taxonomy is the system of classifying, or the system of classification which we follow today, which was proposed by Carl Linnaeus. Now Carl Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist. We will not go into great details about him, but you might be interested in knowing more about him. There are some biographies also available on him. can go through it. In case you are interested, you can also sort of get back to me after the session, so that I'll be able to share some reading material as well. Now, whenever we are classifying or whenever we are talking about taxonomy, remember that taxonomy is a subdivision of biology. So whenever you are studying biology, you study taxonomy as one of the subjects. Okay, or you study that as one of the important topics, and all people, all scientists or all people who study taxonomy are actually called as taxonomists. Okay, now because it is aimed at describing and organizing life, the work which taxonomists do is very closely connected to biodiversity. So when we talk about climate change, when we talk about loss of flora and fauna because of climate change or because of activities of mankind, we are actually referring to a field of conservation biology, which focuses on conservation of diversity of this nature, in which these taxonomists, the people who are looking at classifying organisms, play a very, very important role. So taxonomy is a field of biology. You should also be knowing about conservation biology. Conservation is another field of biology which is now focusing on conserving the diversity of flora and fauna around us. Okay, now once you have the taxonomists sort of identify a particular species, then each of these species is given a particular name. Now, especially in the case of zoology, there is a code itself. So there is something called as the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, according to which the names are given. Now, most cases, the names are derived out of Latin names, and but we by identifying some phrases there, you might be able to pick up the names also, right? So this is zoological nomenclature is basically for the animal kingdom or in the study of animals. For botany, or when we are talking about plants, we use what is called as the International Code of, ICN, International Code of Nomenclature for algae, fungi, and plants. So this is for algae, fungi, and plants. Now, just out of curiosity, what is the study of algae called? Yes, what is the study of algae called? So remember, the study of algae is called as phycology. Phycology. Study of fungus is called as mycology. Okay, what is the study of plants? Study of plants is botany.
Botany.
Yeah. So whenever we are talking about taxonomy, when we are basically what we are doing is we are classifying, we are dividing each one, each of the living organisms that we see around us, and classifying can be done by different ways. Like if I just give you an example, let's say you were given a scenario where you are given 10 objects, okay, 10 non-living objects, and you are asked to classify them. In how many ways can you do it? Or let me talk about, let me pick up what is called as stationary objects. Okay, stationary will include your pen, pencil, right? Your book, eraser, scale, a geometry box, and so on. Okay. Now, if I say, let's say you have to divide this into two groups. How will you divide them?
According to size.
Yeah, when you're dividing according to size, you cannot divide them into two groups. No, you can arrange them in an increasing order or arrange them in a decreasing order. But can you divide them into groups?
No, sir.
So how else can you do that? If I say you have to divide into two groups, yes. Any random guess? Now, one way of classifying them, can I say that I'll put all writing material together? And let's say non-writing material. So the moment I do this, the pen, pencil, book, eraser, they will all go to this writing material. Scale goes to the non-writing material. Your geometrical instrument box will go to as non-writing material and so on. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
You can also say, can I say classify as all measuring instruments can be one group and non-measuring instruments can be another? Then you will say that the scale, the protractor, everything will come into these measuring instruments. All the other stationary material like pen, pencil, book, eraser, your geometry box itself will all fall under the non-measuring instruments. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Can you think of any other way of classifying them? If you look at all the stationary material that you have, can you classify them based on whatever is transparent and whatever is opaque? Am I right?
Yes, sir.
If you have a scale, if it is a plastic scale, there is a high likelihood that it is transparent. You will be able to see through it, right? The other instruments like protractor, your set squares, they'll all be transparent materials. Rest all is made of opaque materials. Like if you take a compass or if you take a pencil, eraser, they are all highly, it's highly likely that they'll be classified into um, opaque materials, right? Now, one thing you have to remember is when our knowledge about anything improves, when our knowledge about anything improves, we start classifying it further. Okay. Now, I'll give you one simple example. When you were first introduced like parts of your body, how many eyes did you have at that time? In your lower grades, maybe possibly in kindergarten, when they had first introduced parts of your body, you would have been shown those two eyes and said that each person has two eyes.
Yes, sir.
Now, as you go further, as you study further, does the number of eyes change?
No, sir.
So you might become an ophthalmologist, you might become a specialist doctor in eye, in the case of eye, but still you will have only two eyes and you are studying only about those two eyes.
Yes, sir.
So what is the difference between a doctor who specializes in studying eyes and a kindergarten student who knows that everyone has two eyes? What is the difference there? Yes.
So the student does not know about it in much detail.
Yeah, the student does not know about it in much detail. The doctor might know as you go further. You might be studying about each part of the eye. As you would have come to high school, all of you know about the parts of an eye. You know that there is a lens, there is a ciliary muscle, there is retina, there is cornea, and all this, right? Someone who specializes in the eye would have studied further, right? Now, because you know slightly more information than the kid in kindergarten, don't you think you will have the ability to classify eyes? Like, for example, you might say people with normal vision are one category, people who have short sightedness are one category, people who have long sightedness belong to another category, so on. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
So, as you gain more information, as you study more and more in greater detail about anything, any particular object, we tend to classify, or we tend to have more information to be able to classify, or we are able to see more and more subgroups, right? Let's say I am a teacher to your class. I come to the class. What is the first thing I observe? In the first way I can classify all of you.
Students were attentive and students were not attentive.
Yeah, so students being attentive is also after some time. The first thing, as I enter a class, if I were to immediately classify all of you, then what should I do? The first classification method is, I'll say, boys and girls, right? I'll separate the first thing that comes to my mind. If I have to divide the class into two groups, I'll say boys separate, girls separate. Now let's say I have been teaching science to you people for some time. I have spent some time. Then let's say I have taught you for maybe a year. Now if I have to divide your class, then in how many ways can I classify all of you people after knowing you for a year?
First of all, attentive, not attentive, then good scorer, bad scorer.
Yeah. Then can I classify all of you based on your aspirations?
Yes, sir.
So there will be a group of students who wants to become doctors, group of students who want to become engineers, right? So you will see that for the same set of students, as we get more and more information, did I have this information when I first came to your class?
No, sir.
Yeah. So as I spend more and more time, or as I get more and more information, our ability to classify improves. So generally, there is a tendency that there are higher number of classifications or higher number of groups which we observe, and that are formed as time progresses. Okay, so interestingly, even in classification, in though we start with the linear system of classification, that was the first method that we would classify with. There are multiple ways. Okay, so just let me give you one table. It is not necessary to for you to remember this table, but this gives an interesting study. Okay, now Linnaeus, when he was doing his work in the 1730s, now I am not sure of the exact year that he came up with the linear system of classification, but in the 1730s, when he was classifying, he only spoke about two kingdoms. Okay, which are those two kingdoms?
Plant and animal.
Yeah, so he spoke about plant. In fact, plante is the word that he would have used, and animals, animalia. Okay. Next, after Linnaeus, there was another system, or another scientist by name Haeckel. Hackel. Okay, Hackel. And Haeckel was doing his work in the 1860s, nearly 130 years after Linnaeus. He came up with three kingdoms. He had slightly more information. So then he suggested, no, two are not sufficient. Let's go for three kingdoms. So what were, any idea what would have been the third kingdom that he wanted to add?
Protista.
Very good. So he added Protista. So he retained Plante. So in fact, he was the one who sort of introduced the word plantae. Otherwise, earlier Linnaeus was using vegetabilia as the name, and you have animalia. Okay. Now after Haeckel, there was another scientist by name Chatham. Okay. Now this person was working in the 1920s. He came up with an idea of two empires. Now you know in from history that an empire is bigger than a kingdom, right? So he said, no, if you are breaking it down, it's slightly difficult. So let me look at one level higher than a kingdom. Like in this earlier case, I had mentioned, use this word domain, right? So that is the level at which he was talking about. So he was talking about two empires. So he was the one first who suggested this prokaryotes. So he suggested prokaryota and eukaryota. Okay. Now people did realize that even this was not sufficient. Okay. Then there was a scientist by name Copeland who came up with some suggestions. So I'll skip that. We'll move to another scientist by name Whittaker and his team, who came up with this suggestion that we will talk about 5 kingdoms. Any idea what those 5 kingdoms were that he was talking about?
Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, Animalia.
Yeah. So Monera, Protista, fungi, plantae, animalia. Okay. Now Copeland, who was working between Shatton and Whittaker, he had actually suggested 4 kingdoms. So he didn't separate plantae and fungi. That was the only difference. So Copeland had suggested 4 kingdoms. Whittaker has suggested 5 kingdoms. The difference is this, only this one. Okay. And finally, the one of the most Whittaker was working in the 1960s. Okay. The most recent is of Cavalier and Smith. Cavalier and Smith. They talk about 2 empires and 7 kingdoms. Any random guess what those kingdoms are? Any guess what those kingdoms are? Let's not get into the empires, but what are those kingdoms that he might be talking about? Cavalier and Smith. So first one is bacteria and archaea. Now, in the one of the earlier classification methods, bacteria and archaea were together, put together, right? So they would be called as bacteria together. We will come to identify what the difference is between bacteria and archaea. Then you have protozoa. Then you have chromista. Then you have fungi. You have plantae. And then animalia. Okay, these are the 7 kingdoms. So any random guess what is the difference between archaea and bacteria? Yes. Any guess what is the difference between archaea and bacteria?
Sir, archaea are false bacteria.
False bacteria. In fact, archaea were also named earlier as archaea bacteria. Right? What are the specialities of them?
So
So we
their cell wall does not consist of cellulose.
so what we will now do is, let's take each of these kingdoms and then go in detail. Okay. First, let's take archaea. Now, archaea, one of the things is you should know that they are all single celled. They are all single celled organisms and they lack nuclei. So if they lack nuclei, what would they be called as? You had another name for it.
Prokaryotes.
Prokaryotes. Yeah. So archaea bacteria are also prokaryotes. Okay. Now, why have they been separated from bacteria? Yes. Any idea why they have been separated from bacteria? So here, remember that there, in terms of properties, in terms of their structure, they are very different from bacteria. Okay. So in terms of size and shape, they are maybe generally very, very similar. There are few bacteria which might look very different. The types of genes and metabolic pathways that archaea bacteria use are very different from those of the regular bacteria. Okay. The other things which are very unique is they just a moment. Yeah. So their ability, or they are much more diverse in terms of the energy sources which they use. Okay. They can take sugars, they can consume ammonia, they can use hydrogen gas, they can use metal ions. So depending on the an ecosystem that they are present in, they have much more or many diverse properties as compared to other bacteria. Okay. Now these archaea bacteria, they actually reproduce. They reproduce asexually. Okay. Now, what are the other when they are when the reproduction happens asexually? What are the different modes by which they can reproduce?
Budding.
Very
Binary
good.
fission,
So, binary fission. Very good. Binary fission, budding,
fragmentation,
Vegetative
fragment,
propagation.
fragmentation. Very good. Yeah. So, endosperms, endospores. Sorry, endospores are not observed in archaea. While they are definitely observed in bacteria, endospores as a mechanism to reproduce is not seen in archaea bacteria. Okay. Now we will not go into great detail of classifying these archaea bacteria further, or archaea kingdom further. Okay. Now let me move to the second one, that is bacteria. How do you define bacteria?
unicellular prokaryotic organisms.
Yeah. So unicellular, single celled, prokaryotic, but still you are not separating, no? What is the difference between bacteria and archaea? Or what is the difference between, let's say, other like a protozoa, which is also unicellular? How would you classify them? Yes. Yes, how would you classify them? Or how would you separate them?
Oh, I know the answer to this one.
Pardon?
I know the answer to this one,
Yeah,
whether I
please.
should participate or not.
Yes, please do.
I think the difference between archaea and bacteria, archaea survive in very extreme conditions. They may or may not breathe oxygen, perform respiration through oxygen, and they are found in extreme hot springs or very high pressure areas. That way, they have survived. They are almost fossils. So that's how we differentiate between the archaea and bacteria.
So one thing, if you look at the name itself, archaea, refers to something very old, right? So Archaebacteria or the kingdom Archaea represents those set of organisms which are very, very old, or which have been there for multiple generations during the time of evolution. So that is one of the primary differences there. Okay. Though we don't go into great detail of what happened and how evolution has happened, that is not the scope of this topic at this point, but that is a very fundamental difference. So archaebacteria are more primitive than the bacteria itself. Okay, so let's go to the next kingdom, that is protozoa. So how do you classify protozoa? They are also single-celled.
Unicellular but eukaryotics.
Yeah, single-celled and eukaryotes. Okay, any other speciality of these?
They lack cell wall.
They lack, definitely, yes, very good. So they lack a cell wall. Then
They are sometimes parasitic in nature.
they are parasitic in nature, very good. Sometimes, not all. So let me add sometimes. Then
They divide by binary fission and budding.
yeah. So before that, one of the very interesting properties of protozoa is they show animal-like behavior. Okay. We use this phrase animal-like behavior. What do we mean animal-like behavior? What is the
They are
difference between animals and plants?
animals can do locomotions and movements, but plants cannot do movements.
Yeah. So in terms of mobility, in terms of the ability to move, in terms of predatory nature, because they can eat, because they are parasitic, right? So protozoa have animal-like nature. In fact, in some books or very old books refer to them as single-celled animals, which was by definition you are sort of taking it to an extreme, which is not the case. But that sort of captures the essence of or what you observe when you see a protozoa. Okay. Next, let's come to the next kingdom, which is chromista. So what are the chromistas? Yes.
So they are single-celled or multi-celled eukaryotic species.
Yeah. So they can be single celled, they can be multicellular. So they are eukaryotic cells. Okay. What else? The primary thing, this chrome is means color, light. Okay, that should tell you that they carry photosynthesis. They have photosynthetic organelles, all of them. Okay, so they have chloroplasts and all of those. Okay, the next kingdom after Chromista, which is the next one?
Fungi.
Fungi. Okay, so just before we jump into fungi, let me define a plant, and then we'll see why a fungi is different from a plant. Okay, so what is the specialty of plant kingdom, or how would you define?
Multicellular and photosynthetic.
Yeah, so they are multicellular. Aren't they eukaryotic?
Yes, sir.
They are multicellular, eukaryotic, and photosynthetic. Now, once I write this, what is the difference between Plantae and Chromista?
Chromista can be unicellular also.
Yes, Chromista can be unicellular also. Okay. Now, by earlier definitions, Plantae meant it included algae and fungus also. Okay. So, by the current definitions, they have been consciously, the definitions have been sort of changed to exclude both algae and fungus. Okay, let's come to yeah, in the plant kingdom, can you think of any other classification, any other further classification that you should know?
Sir, plant kingdoms are further classified
So how are they done?
according to their stages of cells.
Yeah, according to the stages of cells. Now, while we will not go into great detail, you will talk about all the green alpha, then you will talk about birophytes, you talk about pteridophytes, and so on, right? So there are multiple ways of classifying plants further, and let me not get into the greater detail next. So let's come to the next kingdom, that is fungi. So first question, yeah, so these are also multicellular. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
They are multicellular. Are they eukaryotic? They are also eukaryotic.
Yes, sir.
Are they photosynthetic?
No, sir, saprophytic.
They are saprophytic. Very good. So what does this word saprophytic mean?
They depend on
Feed on dead organisms.
Pardon?
dead and decay organisms.
Yeah. So basically they survive on organic matter which is available in the ecosystem around them. Okay. But then why is it that the earlier classifications, fungus was included under Plantae? Yes. In the earlier classifications, fungus was included under Plantae. Now, if they are not photosynthetic, if they are saprophytic, why is it that they were included together?
Sir, both fungi and plants are eukaryotes and they do not show movements also.
Yeah, so structurally, in terms of mobility, in terms of how those physiologically how they are built, they appear to be very, very similar. Okay, now let's move to the last kingdom, that is Animalia. Hmm. This, what would you say about this?
Multicellular, eukaryotic, non-photosynthetic.
Yeah, so this is multicellular, eukaryotic. Then what else?
They are locomotive.
Yes, they are locomotive. They consume food from outside, like non-photosynthetic. Then they can produce sexually, which is also the case in Plantae also generally, right? Then what else can you say about them?
Heterotropic.
Heterotopic, very good. Then what else can you say?
They do not have cell wall.
Correct. See, if I ask you, okay, now let me rephrase this question. Now, which are the kingdoms where there is a cell wall?
In plants,
Plants.
Yeah, and what does that cell wall do?
it protects the
Protect from
inner or
external
cell
environment.
organisms from the outer environment from being destroyed.
Yeah, and it also, don't you think it also gives that structure,
Yes, sir.
definiteness?
Yes, sir.
So when you see in the onion peel, you will see that hexagonal shapes, that definiteness to the structure of a plant cell, which you don't see in an animal cell,
Yes, sir.
right? So the definiteness is something which is also seen very clearly when it comes to plant. That is because of the presence of the cell wall. What does the cell wall have? What is the composition of the cell wall? What is a
Cellulose.
cellulose? Okay, very good. So what is cellulose actually? What is it made of?
Carbohydrate.
Yeah, so it is actually a polymer of carbohydrates, right? Now, can we digest cellulose?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
Yeah, okay. If we can't digest cellulose, why do we eat green leafy vegetables? Because the moment you have green leafy vegetables, they all have cellulose. We can't digest cellulose anyway. Then why do we eat green leafy vegetables?
For roughage.
What is roughage? What you're saying is right. I'm just asking you more questions to sort of clarify for everyone.
Sir, roughage is a fiber that is indigestible material.
It is indigestible material. What is its purpose? What does it help in?
In cleansing of our internal organs.
Yeah. So basically, this fibrous material which is there, you shouldn't say cleansing of organs, but basically cleansing of the digestive tract. So this fiber is what gets pulls all the waste from the digestive tract, ensures that it is excreted. Okay. Now, suppose I ask you, where does virus fit into this entire kingdom? We have now spoken about 7 kingdoms. Where does virus fit in? Yes. Where does virus fit in?
Not in any seven kingdom.
Pardon?
Sir, it is a border between living and non-living things, so we cannot put it between among seven kingdoms.
Okay. So don't you think that even the modern classification is lacking something then?
Yes, sir.
So suppose I ask you, you have to fit in virus also somewhere. Where do you think it should fit in? Yes.
RK.
Okay. Okay. Can you justify your choice?
Sir, because they are very primitive type of organisms and they lack nuclei and they are single celled. Neither they reproduce. They do not have endospores and they cannot even reproduce
Yeah.
sexually.
Broadly, by definition, virus might seem very close to RK, but it is a fact that we can't sort of put these virus in any of the kingdoms that we have just spoken about. Okay. Now, particularly in the animal kingdom, can we divide this further?
Yes, sir.
How do we divide it?
According to chordates and non-chordates.
So what are those chordates and non-chordates? What does that word chordate mean?
The chordate actually means the kingdom or phylum of animal kingdom which possess that what larval stage and adult stage.
Yeah. So one of the earlier mechanisms or one of the ways of classifying animal kingdom was by the presence of the vertebral column. So they would be classified as vertebrates and invertebrates. A slightly more scientific way of classifying, which is now followed, is chordates and non-chordates. So where all chordates basically possess there are like two stages, a larva stage and an adult stage, right? uh, can you let's say if I give you the case of um, starfish, where does that fall? Which part of the animal kingdom is it in? A starfish. Yes.
Echinodermata.
So can you explain why you chose that?
Sir, first of all, starfish, the classification starfish as they are star-shaped and they are mainly fixed into echinoderms because they are like brittle stars and basket stars type.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Brittle being they are referred to as brittle stars or basket stars and so on.
Sir, they are invertebrates.
Yeah, so broadly they fall under the case of invertebrates. So if you were to classify Animalia, you would say invertebrates and vertebrates. And can you classify these vertebrates further? Yes, can you classify these vertebrates further?
Yes, sir.
How would you do that? So going by regular name, you would call them as fishes, then amphibians,
Reptiles,
reptiles,
aves,
or let me use the word birds. Aves or birds both mean the same. Next, the last one,
mammalia.
mammals. Right? Are there animals which fall or which overlap between two of these phylum? Can you give examples? There are usually some questions which might be asked like this. So, is there an overlap between a fish and a mammal? Yes, is there an overlap between a fish and a mammal? So, if I were to give a hint, is a blue whale a fish or a mammal?
So both.
So it is actually classified as a mammal. Okay. But it because it is living inside water, it can by shape and all, it seems very similar to or close to a fish. But a blue whale is classified as a mammal. Why is it classified as a mammal?
For it directly give birth to a child instead of giving eggs.
Yeah. So while the other four families, that is fishes to birds or aves, they all lay eggs. A blue whale directly gives birth to a young one. Okay. Similarly, you will have cases of, let's say, a duck-billed platypus. What is a duck-billed platypus? Anyone? Have you ever read about them? So a duck-billed platypus is another one which looks very similar to a bird, but is actually a mammal. Okay, so you will come across several species which are slightly difficult, or you can't classify them into one particular category. Finally, they would be evolved, or like in this case, in the case of a whale, it has evolved to be classified as a mammal because it gives directly birth to a young one. But by structure and all, it seems very similar to a fish, right? So if you have read about dinosaurs, where would you put these dinosaurs? Pardon? Hello. Where would dinosaurs be put in of these five families? So someone has typed in the chat box that they would be put in the reptiles. Any reason why they may or may not belong to reptiles? Anyone wants to justify why they are reptiles and why they are, or why they aren't reptiles?
Sir, because the dinosaurs reproduce with newborn babies as egg production.
Yeah, so they reproduce with newborn. I mean, basically, they were laying eggs, right? And that's what is also being discovered in fossils even now. And they definitely belong to the reptile family because they look very similar to reptiles. So broadly, you will know that they seem like reptiles, like the dragon lizards and all, which you have, much bigger than that. But they do lay eggs. Okay. Now, for example, what is a kangaroo? Is it a mammal or is it a reptile?
It's a mammal.
Mammal?
But it looks like a reptile, no?
Yes, sir.
So it is a mammal because it gives birth to a young one. But structurally, it might look similar to a reptile. Okay. Where are these indigenous to? Kangaroos? Yes. Where are they indigenous to? Where are they from actually?
Australia?
Australia. Basically, the Australian subcontinent or the Australian continent. So they are only available or only present in the southern hemisphere. Okay. Next, what about penguins? Penguins, are they mammals or are they birds?
A bird.
Birds. Do they lay eggs?
Yeah, they give eggs.
Yeah, so they do lay eggs, but they follow or fall under a subcategory of birds also, where, see, the moment I use the word bird, we all think that they can fly. So penguins belong to a category of non-flying birds, and they do lay eggs. Okay. What about ostriches? An ostrich definitely looks like a bird. Does it lay eggs?
Yes, sir.
What is the specialty of an ostrich egg?
It's very big.
It's very big, yes. What else? Yeah, Parthiban has typed a message in the chat box that it is a unique cell. It is one cell. The entire egg is the biggest cell that we know. Okay. So there are lots of other interesting properties about classifying these organisms and the properties of these organisms that might the several questions might be asked in. Definitely, we will not have or we don't have sufficient time to discuss all of this in great detail. So I sort of quickly ran through much of this. For your knowledge or for your preparation for NTSC, I would also suggest that you do focus a bit on microbes, microorganisms, and the diseases caused by them. Specifically, in this case, you can also talk about or learn about coronavirus. Okay. Now, many people think coronavirus, you will only know about them in the context of this COVID. Okay. Remember that coronaviruses are a family of viruses. When you have common cold also, it is caused by a coronavirus. In fact, there was a funny story that in a local magazine in Canada, someone had written about a coronavirus in the 1980s. And people started circulating that article saying that a scientist in Karnataka had predicted that COVID will come in the 1980s. Actually, that article was about a family of viruses which are called as coronavirus. So whenever we say corona, we are referring to not the present COVID variety which is causing COVID. We are referring to a family of viruses which look very similar because they have that crown-like structure on top of them, because they have that corona. Okay, so there might be lots of questions which might be asked on communicable diseases. Communicable diseases which are caused by microorganisms, diseases caused by all types of the microorganisms, bacteria, virus, protozoa, even fungus, and so on. So, and how they are transmitted, how they replicate, what body part gets affected, what are their symptoms, and what is the line of treatment. So there might be lots of questions around this as well. Okay, like for example, earlier there were lots of questions in the earlier years in NTSC on plasmodium, malaria, uh, and the Anopheles mosquito. There were some questions on chikungunya. Um, then there were also questions on vaccination or immunization. So when someone is given a BCG vaccine, what are we trying to prevent, and so on. So we will not have time to discuss all of these in great detail, but you can learn about those as well during your preparation. Okay. So any specific questions at this point you can ask. Otherwise, I'll then hand over to Maitreyi.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you explain Promista again?
Chromista. See the word every time in whenever you come across this phrase chrome, right? It should immediately indicate that it deals with light, color, and so on. Okay, so this this kingdom Chromista basically represents a family of all those single-celled or multicellular. It can be both single-celled or multicellular organisms, and they are all eukaryotic, and they have similar features, or they basically have photosynthetic organelles. So whenever you talk about chlorophyll and so on, they all fall under this category. Okay, so they are not full-fledged plants because though they have photosynthetic material, they are not growing like plants. Neither are they um, should I say bacteria. Okay, so whenever you refer to algae and all, they all fall under this chromista.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, no questions. Over to you, Maitri.
So thank you.